Well folks, welcome to the final video in the series in which we are going to assemble the final parts of the Penn Surfmaster or Beachcaster reel. Right, our next little job is to put this is the spool pin. You should always, there's three parts here, there's two screws and the pin itself. You should always check that the spool pin is straight before you put it in. This is one of the major design problems with this kind of reel, is that the spool pin, if you put it away fully extended and you drop the reel, it bends it and then it's useless. So you always have a reel case. Now you need to make sure you oil this before you put it in, which I will do eventually. That fits in, so we now put two screws in. Right, once the spool pin is assembled and the two screws are down here, if you turn this you should see it moving about, which is good. The main cog just goes through the bearing, sits on the bearing like so. Now it does seem a little bit wafty, but when this goes down, this is quite precisely made, it actually holds this in place pretty squarely, so I wouldn't worry too much. And you should see that moving when you push that down like that. Now these all need greasing and oiling before you put the cap on, remember. So this has got a new bearing in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and a little one goes in there. Right, so that's now the surfaces of these are very, very flat and they are a precision fit, and the idea is it keeps the sand out of your reel. So make sure that they are clean and free of any grip before you screw it down. If you feel any sort of as you screw it down, then lift it all off, clean it again and put it back. Reassembly the main section. You see the flatted shaft there? Well, that essentially goes into the flats on here. Like so, and it should spin nice and freely, which it wasn't doing before, but it is now, and that's because we've changed the bearings. Now when I got this reel there wasn't a washer here. It had a little screw but not the washer, and that washer stops the plastic getting chewed up. So when you put this nut down, it's the rounded bits that go upwards, and it's left hand thread, okay, so you rotate it anti-clockwise to screw it on. Now that used to be nipped, it doesn't need to be mega tight, and the reason for that is because it's on a bearing. On top of here we then have this plastic spool. Actually I think there's a metal piece too. Yep. Okay, so there's a metal piece that goes in the back, and there's a plastic spool which goes over the flatted piece, and that just goes on like that. Okay, so reassembly of the drag mechanism, which is on the spool on this particular reel. So you should have several parts, and I'll just maybe go over that. So you should have a plastic bush with 4 screws, a rubber bush, pressure plate, friction washer. This is like essentially a tab washer, I guess you call it. Then you get another friction washer, and you get another plate, and then you get another friction washer, and then that's the whole assembly essentially. And there are 4 screws for this, which are just here. I've got them, don't worry. Now it is worth pointing out that the way that Penn have got this, they've essentially got the plastic piece essentially the wrong way round, and then the black piece, and then all the assembly of washers, and then the end cap. Actually that whole thing should be right away around the other way, just so you know. Right, so in the centre of this reel, if you look at the schematic from Penn, there is essentially a bearing, and if you look closely at the schematic, there are actually 2 bearings, one stacked upon the other. And so what you need to do is quickly test these. You get like a tapered piece like this, and get it so it grips the bearing and turn it. And if it feels reasonably smooth, then it's probably okay, and that does need a little bit of oil. Now, because there are two bearings, you need to make sure the other one's okay, so you need to do the same thing on the other side. Just make sure it turns nicely, it's nice and smoothly. If it does, you'll be fine. Okay, so the washers, they go into if you look on the real schematic, the schematic actually has these backwards, so it's got them slightly wrong. They're not supposed to be facing outwards, it's supposed to be facing towards the spool. So the 850 schematic is actually wrong in that respect anyway. So you basically got these flat chaff washers which are driven by the spool pin, and then you've got another friction washer, so it's like a sandwich, and then you've got a tab washer which, if you notice, has a round central hole but tabs to hold the edges, and another friction washer, and then you've got a pressure plate on the top. And these will all be the wrong way around, so when you put the spool on, you have to rotate it until they lock on. You then put, I think you then put that, according to the schematic diagram anyway, there are some sort of locating holes there, and then you put that on top like that. And then you put the screws in. There are some screws there. So screws then need to be screwed down. Okay, so you insert the spool pin with the flat on it, and that locates all the washers in the right place. Then you can tighten these screws down properly. Now this particular reel has a ticker just in the top, underneath. It goes underneath here actually on the reel body, and it also has a ticker in here. So for that reason, you can't. This is actually riveted down. You can't actually get that off. And there's a spring that goes inside, and so you kind of insert this upside down like that. And when you've got it in place, you can see it ticks. But because it's this device here is designed to make a noise, then you basically don't put oil on it. You don't put grease on it or oil on it, because the whole purpose of it is to make a racket, so that you know when the fish is running. So that's really what it's for. So okay, so that was easy, and that is fully working now and ready for assembly. Okay, so the spool, which we also dismantled in this video earlier on, it just goes over this over the top like that. Okay. And then this piece, which is the clicker, which we also dismantled in the video, and it goes onto there, and that screws down, and that gives you your drag. And the handles are standard fitting. Most of you are pretty familiar with this type of fitting now. It has like a hex on it, and it just inserts basically into there. So there is a little plastic bush goes in the other side, and then you basically got the knob that goes on there, and if you tighten that up, it tightens your handle, as you know. I guess you all know that bit, so that's fine. We then have part of the sand cover. This goes on. This part's actually metal, and we'll take the screw out. Right, so let's remove the screw, and there's a little sand cover which goes over here, which goes onto there. Okay, so that screws on like this. At the back here there's another sand cover which I actually don't have, and I'm going to try and get a spare part for that. There is a screw just here where my finger is, which holds that on. You do kind of need it because you need to stop the sand getting into the back of the bearings there. Now then, one thing you need to know is oil and grease go into moving parts generally to lubricate them. These parts here don't really move. Obviously they move when you collapse the handle, but they don't really move when you're using the reel. So they are generally left dry. Now you need to know that, because what a lot of people do is they fill this with either grease or oil, and then what happens is it gets full of sand because the sand sticks to the grease and the oil. So it's actually best to clean this with turps, dry it, and just leave it dry, because it doesn't actually move when you screw the knob down. It's fixed, so it doesn't need lubrication, so you don't actually need to put any oil in that. And if you look at it closely, it has a chromed pin through it, and the inside parts are chromed too, so they're pretty corrosion resistant, pretty corrosion free anyway, and the other bits are plastic. So you don't actually need to oil that, and it's advisable not to, just to stop your reel getting full of sand. Okay, right, so that completes the reassembly of the Penn Surfcaster. Thanks very much for watching, folks. Bye. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of this series of videos in which we have reassembled the Penn Surfmaster 850. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.